venues that do it. So if there's going to be more African American, it's going to like push out something else. You know what I mean? In a sense, until we get it to the point where it's just people can be painters, not African painters. You know what I mean? Where, you know, nobody asked Degas to have a statement about he's dead. But nobody asked of that work to have a statement about ballet dancers. They're just beautiful ballet dancers.
Yeah.
But still, right now, at least in the States, you still get the feeling that it comes with a hyphen. It's an African ballet dancer, or it's African as opposed to just people. You know? I don't know. That's the hardest thing to explain. Anyway, the sun's coming out.
Right.
So yeah.
Just tell us more about what's going on in America in terms of culture. What culture is there in New York City? We're talking about culture. Me, I'm from Africa. I can tell you my culture. I can dance my culture. I can sing my culture. So what's your culture, baby?
You're not gonna have me dancing sitting here, are you? No, the culture in New York City is it's interesting because I'm a born and raised New Yorker, and it's funny, you don't meet that many of us when you're walking around town. Everybody's from somewhere else, and that's great because it brings in all these different influences. And you'll go to a bar. There's a place called Cafe Noir, for instance. You'll go to a bar and there'll be a Mozambican DJ playing Kwaito.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just out of nowhere. Like,
out of nowhere. It's kind of like fabulous.
Yeah, or a Brazilian DJ, and then after he finishes a set, some Argentinian guys will come in and be playing like guitar, like tango stuff, and that's a great part of New York is that you just get everything, and it starts to come together. There have been some great DJs like this guy Nicodemus, who brings all of these influences into his own stuff and makes a sound that's just uniquely New York. At the same time, it's a city built on the financial sector, and so you have bankers coming in from everywhere, bringing the same kind of rote, cultural, you know, bottles and models kind of stuff. Fun for a night. It's not very interesting. Doesn't have any soul to it. Doesn't have much depth to it. And the city right now is trying to make itself really attractive to this kind of person. It has been for the last 10, 12 years. So you've had to look a little deeper for some of the more interesting parts of culture. But I still love having a friend. I have a new, one of my friends just started dating a man from Chile. And she will call me up and she'll be like, hey, Oscar knows this place out in Queens where they do this stuff. And so you head out onto the train to a neighborhood you've never been to before, and the next thing you know, you're in some like Chilean social club. You know, at 3 o'clock in the morning dancing. So New York has a lot of opportunities for different kinds of cultures. You never know what you're going to run into, but it's not as obvious as it used to be. You've got to scratch under the surface of it and be willing to explore a little bit more than you ever had to before.
But when you're comparing that culture with the African culture, what are the differences or the similarities of our culture?
New York culture, and I'm not going to say American culture right now, I'm going to say specifically New York, and then I can talk about American in a minute, but New York culture is not rooted in anything but the fact that people are transient, that they come in, that they may show up, you know. So we've had, obviously we had Native Americans, and then the Dutch and the English, and black, well, they weren't slaves. I mean, some of them were slaves. There was slavery in New York, but you know, African descendants. And then we have the Irish, the Germans, a Jewish immigration, the Italians, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, the Chinese come in. And there's just this massive influx of all these different people. And so New York culture isn't rooted in something traditional, say. It's rooted in everybody's traditions, meeting each other, usually in a slum somewhere in the early 19th century on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where they feel like Gangs of New York, that area called Five Points. All these immigrants come through and just add their own little bit. And so New York culture is really about that. It's about people adding their own little bit. So the code words, when you talk about some of the culture that is on display as you travel around Africa, some of it has a lot of that to it. I think South Africa has a lot of that. Everybody adds their own little bit. A lot of people are coming in. But also there's still a clear line back to something that people remember from home, that people remember from a village, that people remember from the place that they came from. Whereas a lot of New Yorkers, we bring that with us, and then it becomes something new very quickly. And then a generation later, they don't exactly remember where the tradition came from. It just becomes part of New York. So that to me, I think, would be the biggest difference. But you know, I don't really want to make any assumptions about people's cultures that I don't know about. You know what I mean? So, but that's my impression. When you hear people talk here, I hear people say things like, you know, right, and that's where I learned this from my granny. You know, I learned this from wherever. And we don't have that same thing. We do a little bit, but not the same. Now, if you go outside of New York, you get more of that. But in New York itself, it's not quite.
A lot of freelancers.
A lot of freelancers. Yeah, I mean, people just show. I mean, New York is amazing because people do just show up. Even still, with just like a dream of doing some art.
Yeah.
You know, and now it's gotten really expensive, so that's very hard. It's hard to just show up and live. You know, when you had Keith Haring coming in, Jean-Michel Basquiat, he's from New York. He's a Haitian kid from Brooklyn who ends up joining this kind of weird culture where Kool Herc is creating hip-hop, you know, where Joey Ramone and those guys are helping invent punk, and the New York Dolls are helping invent punk. Talking Heads is creating kind of new wave music. Jean-Michel Basquiat is bringing this diaspora experience, this very painful diaspora experience, into this culture. Keith Haring is kind of escaping middle American kind of lack of acceptance about his lifestyle, and he's coming to New York. Madonna shows up out of nowhere. And like, you know, all these people are kind of just coming, sort of seeking refuge in a way, in order to be able to express themselves the way they wanted to express themselves. And New York has always had that history. Even going all the way back. Boston was like the very Puritan center. So that is, you know, the religious laws in the 17th century were very, very strict. Have been up until recently. And so New York accepted, because they were a Dutch colony, were a little more lenient about the practice of religions and didn't spend as much time hunting down witches, for instance, as they did in Boston. That people have always come from Boston to New York to not have to conform to cultural boundaries. And so New York for hundreds of years has had that tradition. And so we don't ask very much of you when you show up. Just, you know, do what you want to do, add something to the mix, and don't get on anybody's nerves. and you'll be good.
So what's your advice on African culture in terms of economy? How can they develop themselves in terms of like making their products into economy?
In the US?
Yeah, in New York.
In New York? I think that the biggest thing to know is that there is a demand. People are interested. People want to hear new sounds. People want to see new ways of viewing the world. I'll expand creative to be like philosophies too. People want to hear. The U.S. is a country right now that's really starting to bring itself back into the world, I think. And there's a generation of us, well, mainly kids younger than me, who are very comfortable being around all sorts of global influences. In certain cities, you'll see an Ethiopian, Eritrean diaspora. In certain cities, you'll see a Somali diaspora or a Ghanaian diaspora. New York doesn't quite have a single dominant diaspora. We have Petit Dakar up on 119th Street, but what I would say in terms of bringing it in is that once you can get some connection to the city, it helps a lot. You know, it's hard to just sell stuff to New York without either being there or having someone there who kind of is vouching for the quality of what you're doing, you know? And so if you can't up and move to Brooklyn, fine. But like, reach out to someone, connect with them, say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Connect with a young designer that you might have heard of. You know, if you can send them an email or something, that'd be great. Say, hey, this is what I'm up to. Can you take a look at it? And you'd be surprised at how many people will say, yeah, okay, send it to me. Let me see what it looks like. And if your work is good, people will find a way to try and make something happen. So I think that would be what I would say about that, is that in a lot of ways it's a very intimidating market to enter. Everybody comes to New York to try and make their mark. You know, so there are a lot of people there hustling, selling CDs on the street, trying to make their mark. But all of these people also know what it means to hustle. So when they make it a little bit, and they see somebody else on the come up, they see someone else trying to, make their way, they're very willing to help.
Yeah.
It's just about finding that connection and having them help bring you into that space.
All right. So that's great. I can see the perspective now. I've got full view of New York City.
I mean, the other thing about New York is you're kind of from a neighborhood. I'm basically from downtown and from Brooklyn, and it could be different in the Bronx. I don't know, but I can just tell you about the New York I know, and that it's very culturally accepting, always into kind of new things. Don't get distracted by the bankers and all of that. They're gonna be there always, and that's fine, But look for the interesting people. Reach out to them. Keep being persistent with them, and they'll help. If there are people who really want this. We know we've been a country that has walled itself off in a lot of ways, and that's made people hungry to see what else is out there.
So what's your advice to the men there in the community, in the poor community, who has creativity, who's able to produce some of the goods, but who doesn't have awareness or something just at all? So what's your advice to those people there in the communities?
That's tough. I mean, what I would say is if you can get anything on a digital platform, that helps. I know that's not always that easy, but it's with New York, you have to be able to see something quickly. If somebody says, "Oh, that sounds cool. Can you send me something, or can I take a look at it?" Like, you have to have something that they can take a look at. So even if it's just snaps online or a sample or something like that people can have in hand, or that people can see really quickly on their computers, that would help a lot, because people move really quickly, and they'll give you the time, but when you get it, you've got to move on it. When somebody responds to you with, "Hey, that sounds really interesting. Can I see it? Can I do it?" You got to move on it, or else they'll be on to the next thing really quickly. So.
A little bit more about your company as a researcher.
Sure. Thanks. Fireside. It's called Fireside Research, and the initial idea was that we wanted to create a venue that let African voices from throughout the continent be heard more broadly in political and social and economic conversations in the U.S. We found that the biggest impediment to that wasn't travel. It wasn't anything else. It was that people in the U.S. didn't know where to look. They were interested in topics that affected South Africa, Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, wherever. But they didn't know who to contact on the ground to say, "Hey, can you speak about this? Can you talk this through?" And so Fireside was set up to be a single place that they can come, where they come to us and say, "Hey, we want to talk about how movies get distributed through West Africa, right? How Nollywood movies get distributed through West Africa." And we can say, "Okay, these are the 10 people that we know who really have something interesting to say about this. These are the people you should bring in for your conference. These are the people you should set up for your briefings with investors." And so that's how Fireside got started. And that's really what we do. We try to just facilitate contact between our audience in the States and our clients in the States and the people we know to be the real experts, which are people on the ground here. So that's really just what we try to do. We've started to do some professional development work too. One of the things that we're doing with Arterial is an arts management professional development program that works with network leaders throughout the Arterial network to pair them with mentors in the U.S. who can help bring them and their organizations into greater focus in the U.S. So these folks have done amazing work where they are, and they're now interested in kind of expanding that. And there's just some little things about the U.S. market, about how you brand yourself, how you ask for certain things that are just culturally specific. And so we're pairing them up with mentors to help them understand those specific cultural ways of working in that community, so that their organizations can start to raise money in the U.S. or just get more coverage in the U.S. and things like that. So.
Oh, that's great, man. I know. Thanks.
Of course, man.
Yeah, hopefully you're going to be there in New York another time. When is your next session, your facilitation session?
The next session we're doing something in November. We're just getting it planned now, so I don't want to say too much about it. We're doing something in November, and then we're doing something in February on fashion, and particularly ways African designers and importers and things like that can work with buyers in the U.S. to have more designs brought in, have the bigger houses see them, have a lot of the boutiques that are around town start looking at designers from around the continent to bring their stuff into the States. So that look for that around February or March.
All right. Looking forward to get that one. Thanks very much, Mr. David.
Of course, man.
Good one, man.
Thank you.
Is that what you needed?
Yeah, that's